If your home has heat but still feels cold, you're not imagining it. Monks living in freezing mountain monasteries solved this problem centuries ago without smart thermostats, heat pumps, or expensive technology. In this video, we'll move quickly through the real reasons those stone buildings can feel warm with simple fire and design, while modern homes often feel drafty and uncomfortable. First, you'll see why the real enemy isn't low temperature, but heat loss and hidden air leaks. Then we'll look at how monks store heat inside heavy materials instead of wasting it in short bursts of hot air. You'll learn why they warm one core room on purpose instead of trying to heat empty space. The most important insight comes next. Real comfort is largely about radiant warmth, which is why cold walls and windows can make you feel chilled even when the air is technically warm. And finally, I'll show you a monk-style warmth blueprint you can apply at home without major renovations. By the end, you'll understand why a house can read 21 degrees and still feel miserable, and why a simple stone room with a small fire can feel calm, steady, and genuinely warm. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most modern homes don't feel cold because you didn't heat them enough. They feel cold because they lose heat faster than your system can replace it, and your body notices that loss as discomfort. The fastest thief is air movement. A tiny gap around a door, a leaky window frame, an attic hatch, outlets on an exterior wall. Those aren't minor details. They create pressure-driven airflow that pulls warm air out and drags cold air in. And even when the room thermometer looks fine, that moving air strips heat from your skin and makes you feel chilled. But there's an even bigger reason you can feel cold in a heated room: cold surfaces. Thermal comfort isn't just air temperature. It's also what your body is radiating heat toward. If the walls and windows are cold, your body loses heat to them by radiation, and you feel cold even with comfortable air. This is why radiant temperature is such a big deal in real comfort science, and why the same room can feel completely different depending on whether surrounding surfaces are warm or cold. This is the modern trap. We chase hotter air, but we ignore the envelope. Monasteries, by necessity, prioritize the envelope and the fundamentals. Blocking drafts, reducing heat loss, and keeping surfaces warmer, because in a mountain winter you can't afford to waste heat. And once you stop heat loss, you don't need heroic heating to feel comfortable. The next question is where monasteries really start to win: how they store heat, because they don't rely on constant hot air the way many modern homes do. They charge heavy materials with fire, then let those materials release warmth for hours like a battery, and that changes everything. Most modern homes try to win winter with one strategy: keep the air warm constantly with a system that cycles on and off all day. Monasteries in cold mountains often win with the opposite strategy. They heat mass, then let that mass radiate warmth slowly like a battery, so comfort lingers even when the flame is small or already gone. The principle is simple and brutally effective. A short, intense heat source can charge dense materials, stone, rammed earth, brick. Then those materials release that energy back into the room for hours as gentle radiant heat instead of a blast of hot air. This isn't just folk wisdom. It's the same logic behind masonry heaters, which are designed to burn hot and fast, and then store heat in a large thermal mass that releases warmth gradually over long periods. Many guides describe these systems as releasing stored heat for roughly 12 to 24 hours after a burn, which is exactly the shape of heat monks need. Steady, predictable, not dramatic. That thermal battery effect matters because the body doesn't only respond to air temperature. It responds to the temperature of the surfaces around it, because your skin is constantly exchanging heat with walls, floors, and nearby objects through radiation. In a space where surfaces are warmed by stored heat, you can feel comfortable at a lower air temperature because the room is no longer acting like a cold sink. This is why the same amount of fuel can feel completely different depending on how it's used. If you burn for quick air heat in a leaky room, comfort disappears as soon as the flame dies. If you burn to warm mass inside a tighter envelope, the building itself becomes the heater, and comfort becomes quieter but longer lasting. And you can actually see this principle reflected in research on monastic buildings in cold regions. Field studies of monastic residential buildings report design choices that increase thermal inertia. One example notes that thick rammed earth perimeter walls can be increased to around 250 millimeters or more to improve thermal inertia, meaning the structure resists rapid temperature swings and holds heat more effectively. That thickness does two things at once. It slows heat loss to the outside, and it increases the interior mass available to store warmth. Even without knowing the mathematics, monks lived inside the result. The room warms more slowly, but once warm, it stays warm, and it doesn't collapse into cold the moment the fire calms down. Traditional Tibetan building discussions also describe earth walls functioning as thermal mass in passive heating logic, capturing and holding heat over time rather than chasing immediate air temperature. Now, add the fuel reality. In many high-altitude Tibetan regions, the goal historically wasn't to create a summer indoors temperature all day. It was to create a stable core comfort zone while avoiding waste. That often means smaller, focused heating sources, stoves, compact fire points, heated platforms, paired with heavy floors and walls that can absorb heat and then release it slowly. You can find practical descriptions of Tibetan homes emphasizing thick stone walls and earthen floors that trap and hold heat, and while a YouTube source isn't academic, it matches the broader building physics logic and what field research observes in cold climate vernacular architecture. The environment is too harsh for fragile comfort strategies. This is also where modern homes sometimes sabotage themselves. Lightweight construction heats up fast, but cools down fast. Thin surfaces stay cold, so the body feels chilled even when the thermostat reads comfortable. And forced air heat can create stratification and drafts. Warm air pooling near the ceiling while feet stay cold, or airflow that strips heat from skin. That draft sensation is one reason people crank the heat higher and still complain the house feels sharp or dry. Comfort science consistently points out that discomfort isn't just about average temperature. It's about local discomfort factors like air movement, cold surfaces, and temperature differences in the space. So when monks store heat, they're not being quaint. They're solving multiple comfort problems simultaneously. They reduce the need for constant fuel, they reduce the drama of temperature swings, and they raise the mean radiant environment so the body stops losing heat to cold walls and floors. And the most important part is what this does psychologically. When warmth is steady, the nervous system relaxes. When warmth is volatile, hot blasts, cold sinks, drafts, the body stays slightly guarded, which people interpret as stress, restlessness, or poor sleep, even if they don't use those words. Monasteries aim for steadiness because steadiness supports long attention, calm breathing, and sleep that doesn't feel like a fight. But heat storage alone still isn't the whole monastery advantage, because even a warm thermal battery can be wasted if you try to heat too much volume. The next move is what makes the system feel almost unfairly efficient. Monasteries don't attempt to warm an entire building evenly the way modern homes try to do. They create a warm core room, they control boundaries, and they treat warmth like a resource that must be kept where life actually happens, which is exactly where we go next. The next reason monasteries feel warmer than modern homes has nothing to do with having more heat. It has to do with wasting less of it. Modern homes often try to keep every room at roughly the same temperature, even rooms nobody uses for hours. Hallways, guest bedrooms, storage spaces, bathrooms, open-plan areas with high ceilings. That approach sounds comfortable, but in a cold environment, it's inefficient because you're spending fuel and heat output on volume that isn't actually supporting your body at the moments that matter. Monasteries evolve the opposite strategy. They create a warm core, and they treat the rest of the building as buffers. The warm core is where life happens: study, chanting, meals, conversation, rest. So warmth is concentrated where people spend time, and the surrounding rooms act like insulation layers rather than comfort zones. This is why you can walk through a monastery and feel a dramatic difference from one room to the next. The goal isn't uniform warmth, it's functional warmth. That zoning mindset shows up in many cold climate vernacular buildings around the world, and monasteries leaned into it because it matches human needs. You don't need warm air everywhere. You need warmth where your body is. The practical effect is huge. A smaller heated space warms faster, stays warm longer, and feels more stable because less surface area is bleeding heat at once. Every time you reduce the volume you're heating and reduce the number of exterior walls involved, you reduce heat loss, and the room stops fighting the outside as aggressively. This is why monks can get comfortable with surprisingly modest heat input. Because the heat is not being asked to do an impossible job. They're not trying to heat empty air in distant rooms. They're building a warm island inside a cold sea, and they enforce that island with boundaries. Doors matter, curtains matter, thresholds matter. A thick hanging cloth in a doorway can act like a primitive air seal, reducing convective flow from cold corridors into the warm room. Layering like that looks simple, but it changes the physics. You slow air exchange, you reduce drafts, and you keep the warm zone stable. Adults can feel this instantly, because the sensation of warmth is strongly tied to the absence of air movement and the warmth of the surfaces around you. If you've ever sat near a drafty hallway, you know the feeling. The room can be heated, but one invisible stream of cold air makes you tense and uncomfortable. Monks design against that by default. They also reduce vertical heat waste. Warm air rises, so high ceilings and big modern open spaces can trap heat near the top while your feet stay cold, pushing people to raise the thermostat to compensate. Monastic warm rooms are often more human-scaled, where they use design and layout to keep the occupied zone comfortable without needing to overheat the entire air column. Then there's a behavior layer that modern homes rarely teach. Monasteries don't treat heat as background. They treat it as a resource that must be managed. Doors are closed deliberately. People gather where warmth is. Activities are planned around the warm space. Even sleeping arrangements often reflect this logic. Beds and mats placed where radiant warmth is better, away from cold exterior walls, sometimes on raised platforms to reduce heat loss to the floor. Across many cultures, heated platforms exist for exactly this reason. Don't heat the whole air volume. Heat the surfaces that touch the body. In parts of Asia, systems like the Kong, a heated masonry bed platform warmed via flues, are a famous example of put the heat where the person is, and the concept is the same even when the exact architecture differs. Warmth is most efficient when it targets the human zone rather than the building's entire volume. Monasteries often pair this with thermal mass, so the core room isn't just warm for an hour. It stays warm because the walls and floors are carrying stored heat, turning the entire room into a gentle radiator. In contrast, a modern home that heats everything evenly often ends up with rooms that are technically warm but still feel cold because surfaces remain cool, drafts persist, and the occupant zone is never truly stable. The core room strategy also explains why monasteries can maintain comfort during the night or early morning even if the fire isn't constantly roaring. The warm core has less exterior exposure, less air exchange, and more stored heat. But here's the twist. The reason your modern home still feels cold, even when you zone and block drafts, is usually not the air at all. It's the radiation exchange with cold windows and walls. And that's the most misunderstood piece of comfort in the modern world. So next we're going to talk about radiant warmth. Why a room can read a comfortable temperature and still feel miserable, and how monasteries quietly solve that with design choices that make the body feel safe and warm, not just heated. Most people have never been taught the real reason a heated room can still feel cold. Your body doesn't only feel air temperature, it feels what it's radiating heat toward. And if the surfaces around you are cold, windows, exterior walls, floors, your body loses heat to them and you experience that loss as chill, even when the thermostat says the air is warm. This is why two rooms at the exact same temperature can feel completely different, and why adults often describe one space as sharp or damp or bone cold, even when the numbers look fine. Comfort is largely driven by mean radiant temperature, the average temperature of the surfaces around you that your body is exchanging heat with. In a modern house, especially one with large glazing, thin walls, or cold corners, you might be heating the air while sitting inside a box of cold surfaces, and your body is constantly paying the radiative tax. That tax shows up as cold hands and feet, tension in the shoulders, restlessness, and the classic move of turning the thermostat higher and higher because you're trying to solve a radiation problem with air. Monastic buildings and many cold climate traditional buildings unintentionally solve this because they do two things modern houses often don't. They raise surface temperatures and they reduce cold radiant sinks. Thick masonry, stone, rammed earth, and heavy interior surfaces don't just store heat for later. They also stop the interior surface from dropping as quickly when the outside is freezing, which means the walls you're sitting beside aren't acting like cold plates sucking warmth out of your skin. Add a small fire or a stove, and those surfaces gently warm, and the entire room becomes a low-intensity radiator rather than a drafty hot air box. This is why a stone room can feel strangely settled once it's charged, and why the warmth feels calmer. You're not fighting cold radiation all day. Windows are the other major culprit. Glass runs cold in winter, especially at night, and you can feel that cold from across the room because radiation doesn't care about drafts. Your body exchanges heat with what it sees. This is why sitting near a big window can feel cold even if the air is warm, and why heavy curtains, shutters, and layered window coverings can change comfort dramatically. They don't just block air leaks, they raise the effective radiant environment by reducing the cold surface you're radiating toward. The monastery version of this is simple. Smaller openings, deeper window reveals, thicker walls, and fewer giant glass panels, plus habits that close off openings and concentrate life away from the coldest surfaces. Even when monasteries do use openings, they often rely on sun strategically. Morning sun to charge surfaces, then closing the space down to keep that stored warmth from bleeding out. That's passive solar logic in human terms. Take free heat when it arrives, store it in mass, then protect it with layers. The adult-friendly way to understand this is to stop thinking my house is cold and start thinking my surfaces are cold. If your walls and windows are cold, your body will keep bleeding heat no matter how warm you blow the air, which is why forced air heat can feel like it's constantly chasing discomfort. Radiant comfort flips the experience. Once surfaces are warmer and drafts are lower, you can often feel comfortable at a lower air temperature because the room stops stealing heat from you. This also explains why monks can sleep better in harsh climates. Stable radiant conditions reduce microarousals and restlessness because the body isn't repeatedly reacting to cold edges, cold floors, or cold streams of air. And now that you understand the missing piece, the final section becomes almost unfairly practical because you can copy radiant comfort and core room strategy at home without rebuilding your house. You just need to know exactly what to change first, what to ignore, and what habits make the difference between heated and genuinely warm. If you want your home to feel warm the way a monastery does, you don't start by buying a stronger heater. You start by changing the system your heat is trapped inside. Then you change where the heat is allowed to live, and finally you change how you use the space. Step 1 is stopping the invisible thieves, drafts, and uncontrolled air exchange. Adults can feel this immediately because moving air is discomfort, and comfort starts when air stops moving against your skin. So you seal the obvious leak points first: door gaps, window edges, the bottom of exterior doors, attic hatches, and any place you can feel a faint cold stream on your hand. Even simple measures like door sweeps, weather stripping, and draft stoppers can dramatically reduce that cold for no reason feeling because they cut convective heat loss and stop that constant skin-cooling airflow. Step 2 is the monk move. Pick one core room and make it the warm island. This is the biggest mental shift for modern homes. Instead of trying to keep the entire house uniformly comfortable, you decide where life happens for the next few hours. Reading, watching, working, eating, and you warm that space intentionally. Close the doors. Use curtains as boundaries. Don't leak your warmth into unused corridors. The reason this works is simple physics. A smaller volume with fewer exterior exposures requires less heat input and stays stable longer, which is exactly why monasteries feel calm and steady inside, even when the outside is brutal. Step 3 is the piece people forget. You warm surfaces, not just air. That means controlling the cold radiant sinks. If windows make the room feel cold, you treat them like a weak point. Heavy curtains at night, layered coverings, keeping seating away from direct exposure to cold glass, and using rugs to stop the floor from acting like a heat drain. The goal is to raise the mean radiant environment so your body stops paying the radiation tax. Step 4 is storing heat instead of constantly chasing it. In a modern home, you can approximate thermal mass behavior without rebuilding walls by using steady, lower-intensity heating aimed at the occupied zone and by avoiding rapid on-off cycles that create volatility. If you have a safe, efficient stove or heater, you run it in a way that creates stable surfaces, not dramatic hot blasts followed by cold collapse. If you don't, you still adopt the monastery principle. Charge the core room, protect it with boundaries, and don't let it drain away into empty space. Then comes the habit layer, which matters more than people expect. Monks don't ventilate by leaving things open for hours. They refresh air briefly and then seal back down, because long open ventilation dumps stored warmth and cools surfaces, making the room feel cold for a long time afterward. They also use layers on the body as part of the heating system. Warm socks, layered clothing, and insulating bedding reduce the amount of room heat required to feel comfortable. And that's not a weakness. It's efficient design, the same way you don't run a fire to heat the entire mountain outside. The common mistakes are predictable. People try to heat the entire house equally. They keep doors open so heat can circulate. They rely on blowing hotter air instead of reducing heat loss. And they chase the thermostat number instead of fixing cold surfaces and drafts. And a final safety note, because this matters. If you use combustion appliances indoors, with stoves, fireplaces, gas heaters, proper ventilation and carbon monoxide safety are non-negotiable. Monk warmth is not worth unsafe air. When you apply this blueprint, you stop thinking like a modern consumer and start thinking like a monastery. Warmth is a resource. Comfort is radiation plus still air, and the winning move is not more heat. It's less loss, better storage, and smarter use of the space. Once you feel what stable warmth is like, no drafts, warmer surfaces, a core room that stays calm, you realize why modern homes can feel cold even with technology, and why an old stone room with a small fire can feel like it's holding you instead of fighting you.